He came to speak truth, not entertain. Ibrahim Traoré's explosive confrontation with Trevor Noah started with light laughs but escalated into one of the most powerful moments ever broadcast. Did you catch the shocking line that silenced the studio just before Traoré walked off the stage? The clip went viral for a reason. The stakes for truth have never been higher. Get ready to find out why everyone is still talking about that moment. Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favor. If you appreciate this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So did you click the subscribe button? Great. Thank you so much. Now back to the video. What happens when comedy meets conviction? The opening exchange between Trevor Noah and Ibrahim Traoré wasn't your typical late-night banter. It started with an air of levity, as Noah leaned on his signature humor to put the audience at ease and set a casual tone. He joked about Traoré's unexpected rise to the presidency, teasing him about his youth and referencing how unusual it was to see someone so young leading a nation. "Shouldn't you still be in school?" Noah quipped, earning scattered laughter from the audience. The jokes kept coming, poking fun at Traoré's military background, with playful comments about dress codes and whether his preferred looks were more suited for medals or memes. Traoré, seated opposite Noah with an expression that was hard to read, did not interrupt or laugh along. Instead, when his turn to respond came, he spoke with a calm precision that immediately shifted the atmosphere. In his opening remarks, he acknowledged the humor, but pivoted sharply, reminding Noah and the audience of the weight of his responsibilities. "I may be young," he began, his voice steady, "but I carry the voice of my people, a people who have remained unheard for too long." The words struck a contrast with the light-hearted tone of the opening. The room hadn't entirely lost its air of entertainment, but the lingering chuckles gave way to murmurs as Traoré's focus became clear. The tension deepened as Traoré began describing the reality of those he represents in Burkina Faso. His calm demeanor didn't falter, yet his words carried a sharper bite. He talked about centuries of marginalization, about a country that had endured colonial exploitation, economic instability, and violence while much of the world turned a blind eye. "For us," he said, holding Noah's gaze, "leadership is not an achievement, it is survival." The audience, at first finding humor in Noah's easygoing probing, now seemed unsure of how to react. It was as if a collective realization crept through the studio. What had begun as entertainment was turning into something far more confrontational than anyone had anticipated. The disparity between the audience's initial laughter and their growing discomfort mirrored the divide Traoré was illustrating. At one point, he described what leadership meant in Burkina Faso. It wasn't about appearances or youthful novelty, he explained, but about reclaiming agency for a people historically forgotten. It felt less like a conversation and more like a speech meant for more than just those in the room. The contrast was almost cinematic. Noah leaning back with his trademark smirk, representing the role of entertainer, while Traoré leaned forward slightly, every statement deliberate. The atmosphere seemed to thicken, made heavier by Traoré's ability to overtake Noah's humor-driven style with stark proclamations. Burkina Faso's history loomed over the exchange. Widely considered one of the poorest nations in the world, it has faced unrelenting challenges, from disrupted leadership to corruption and systemic underdevelopment. The nation's own struggles mirrored those of its people as they tried to forge paths of independence beyond their colonial past. Traoré's position as a young leader carried significant weight because it symbolized a break from the country's troubled political heritage, riddled with instability. He wasn't reluctant to remind Noah of this either. "We don't joke," he said bluntly at one point, as though clarifying that his country's challenges leave no room for levity. Trevor Noah's comedic style, which thrives on tension and release, began to grind against Traoré's increasingly serious tone. Where the audience might expect quips or concessions, Traoré offered nothing but resolve. This wasn't just an awkward moment. It was the collision of two entirely different approaches to communication. Traoré had made it clear. His purpose on that stage wasn't amusement. It wasn't an interview anymore. It was a clash between two ideologies. As Noah tried to find footing in humor, Traoré had already drawn a definitive line in the sand. If anyone watching thought Noah could steer this back to his comfort zone, they were about to be proven wrong. What happens when a planned takedown turns into an unintentional spotlight? As the interview progressed, Trevor Noah attempted to steer the conversation into more dangerous territory for Ibrahim Traoré by showing a carefully selected and selectively edited clip from one of Traoré's press conferences. The footage, intended to paint Traoré as uncertain and unprepared, showed him pausing awkwardly before answering a question about sanctions and inflation. For added effect, Noah played the clip with a comical undertone, even prompting laughter from the studio audience as he quipped about the uncomfortable silence during Traoré's pause. Noah's strategy was clear. The goal was to dismantle Traoré's composure and showcase a crack in his armor. The logic was simple. A leader caught unprepared loses credibility, and with an audience eager for light entertainment, it seemed like an easy way to tip the conversation in Noah's favor. But as the laughter faded, Traoré's reaction immediately set the tone for what would follow. Without breaking any sign of composure, he addressed both Noah and the audience simultaneously. "That's disappointing," he began. His words landed with a measured calm that broke through the tension. "You combed through 10 hours of footage to find 5 seconds where I paused, and you didn't have the courage to show the rest. The part where I explained how our reforms brought power back to the people." The audience, initially caught in the cue to laugh at Noah's setup, shifted uneasily in their seats. The shift was palpable, and Traoré was just beginning. Instead of brushing off the attempt to ridicule him, Traoré seized the moment to counter with a direct explanation of why that press conference mattered. And he didn't stop at words. Traoré delved into hard facts. Before these reforms, over 60% of our national infrastructure was outsourced to foreign contractors that killed over 500,000 jobs across West Africa. His comments were deliberate and data-heavy, a stark contrast to Noah's effort to keep things light and palatable. The tone of the conversation had changed so abruptly that even Noah seemed taken aback. The studio's reactions mirrored the stakes of what was unfolding. Some murmurs rose in support of Noah's previously lighthearted interjections. But as Traoré continued to explain the effects of reduced foreign control and increased local production, which he noted was up 25% under his policies, the seriousness of his words began to anchor the moment. The scattered applause and cheers for Traoré grew louder, pushing back against the initial impression Noah was trying to create. At the same time, there were audible boos coming from some corners of the room, laying bare a divide not just in the conversation, but in the audience's perception of it. The numbers Traoré presented weren't just random tidbits. They struck at the heart of what Burkina Faso's leadership was trying to achieve. By taking steps to prioritize local job creation and production, Traoré argued, the nation was clawing back control over its own resources and reducing dependency on foreign powers. Powers that, he implied, had no real interest in the welfare of his people. In delivering this argument, Traoré had not only dismantled the selectively edited narrative, but had also used Noah's tactic against him, framing the clip as proof of how external perspectives often misrepresent the realities within Burkina Faso. For Noah, accustomed to controlling the pacing of his interviews, this dynamic was unfamiliar territory. His typically sharp humor seemed ineffective against Traoré's ability to stay on message and elevate the conversation beyond the scope of jest. As Traoré laid out the importance of economic independence, Noah found himself on the defensive, occasionally trying to interject with smaller quips that failed to land. The balance had shifted. In what could have been a moment of vulnerability for Traoré, his data-driven rebuttal transformed the narrative altogether. The efforts to undermine his leadership only reinforced his resolve, and the audience began to see him as more than just a political figure, as someone using real change to back up his words. The stakes weren't just about public opinion anymore. They were about personal conviction. And while Noah tried to salvage the humor, Traoré's presence left no room for it. If this conversation had begun as an attempt to challenge Traoré, it had now become a stage for him to showcase his vision. One line, one walk-off, and just like that, a leader rewrote the rules of media confrontation. The final moments of the interview felt less like a conversation and more like a courtroom where the stakes were undeniable. By this point, the tension had grown thick. And Ibrahim Traoré was no longer sparring with jokes or avoiding ambushes. He was going directly at Trevor Noah. As the subject of the interview shifted once again, Traoré used the opportunity to address something much bigger than the studio walls. He turned to Noah with a directness that left no room for misinterpretation. "You use comedy to bend the truth," Traoré said slowly, making each word land with weight. "But the people I speak for cannot afford distortions. They are starving for survival, not for entertainment." The room seemed to hold its breath. For an audience used to Noah's quick-witted comebacks and lighthearted tone, this statement was a gut punch. Noah, who had spent years mastering the balance of humor and criticism, now found himself the focus of painfully sharp scrutiny. Traoré didn't stop at the accusation. He pointed to the broader consequences of comedic narratives when they mask or trivialize genuine struggles. "In my country," he went on, "when you tell half a story, it is not harmless. It is lethal. Your laughter comes at the expense of unburied graves." And then he said it, "We are standing in the mud while you sip lattes." The contrast in that metaphor hit hard. It was a quiet, devastating summary of the gap between those who suffer through systemic challenges and those who watch from a distance, often through the sanitized lens of entertainment. The phrase ricocheted through the studio and into viewers' minds. It was simple yet piercing, embodying the gulf between privilege and struggle. The reaction was immediate. Some in the audience gasped. A few clapped, either out of respect for the power of his words or discomfort over the tension. Noah's usual smirk faded, replaced with a silent search for a way to salvage control of the moment. That statement, brief as it was, resonated far beyond the walls of the studio. It pointed not only to his frustrations with Noah's approach that night, but also to a much larger issue: a media ecosystem that prefers digestible humor over the painful truths that might compel action. Analysts later noted the brilliance of Traoré's phrasing, calling it both stark and disarming. A study in contrasts: mud versus lattes, reality versus performance. It was a declaration stripped of any excess, aimed directly at a system of representation that often ignores the humanity of those it claims to spotlight. What followed sealed the event's place in history. Traoré reached for his microphone, unhooked it deliberately, and stood up. His movement was slow, measured, purposeful. He faced Noah one final time and said, "The truth doesn't need a stage." With that, he walked off, leaving the host and audience stunned into silence. No music, no cut to commercial, just the visual of an empty chair where Traoré had sat seconds before. This wasn't just defiance. It was a rejection of the format itself. It was a reminder that some conversations demand respect too deep for applause lines. Within hours, the clip of Traoré removing his mic and exiting the stage went viral. Social media erupted with hashtags like #Traoré Storm and #Truth Over Satire. Analysts, writers, and even academics began dissecting those four words. The truth doesn't need a stage, and what they said about authenticity, power, and the media's relationship to the truth. It was hailed as one of the most unscripted, raw moments in political television, with many comparing it to acts of defiance rarely seen in such settings. College professors played back those final moments in media studies courses, examining how Traoré's decision to leave the platform wasn't weakness, but a reclaiming of power. Beyond the viral moment, the broader impact of Traoré's actions became clear. His words inspired a sense of urgency and action, trending across platforms. "I didn't confront Trevor Noah for myself. I did it for Africans who don't have a voice on global platforms," Traoré explained days later in an interview. For many, this distilled the weight of his actions. It wasn't just a single event. It was a call to dismantle narratives that belittle or erase. This wasn't the resolution anyone expected. Yet 4 words in one quiet act accomplished more than even a fiery debate ever could. The truth, as Traoré reminded the world that night, belongs to no stage. It stands alone. The clash between Ibrahim Traoré and Trevor Noah revealed something profound about modern media. When humor, a tool often used to comment on serious issues, collided with raw conviction, it exposed the limits of performance. Traoré's refusal to let his message be diluted by laughter underscored the growing demand for authenticity in a world saturated with curated narratives. His final act wasn't just about speaking truth, it was about showing its power to stand alone. How many times have carefully crafted stories shaped your view of global struggles? Sometimes walking away says more than staying ever could.